The glass door of Harrison Technologies felt heavier than usual that morning. Maybe it was the weight of what I carried in my pocket. A stock certificate proving I now own 2% of my father's company. 2% might not sound like much, but it had taken every penny I'd saved over the past 3 years to buy those shares. More importantly, it was just the beginning. My name is Elizabeth Harrison, though nobody at Harrison Technologies knows that. Here, I'm just Beth Williams, the quiet woman who comes in at night to clean offices. The same woman who spent the last 3 years watching, learning, and slowly piecing together her plan while the nighttime security guard dozes at his desk. I adjusted my cleaning cart, making sure the supplies were neatly arranged. Everything had to look normal, especially today. As I pushed the cart toward the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished brass doors. At 28, I looked more like my mother than ever. The same dark hair, the same determined set to my jaw. My father wouldn't recognize me even if he looked straight at me. He hadn't seen me since I was a baby, and he never looked for me since. The elevator doors opened to the executive floor, and I stepped out into the familiar silence of the night shift. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the city lights, a view my father enjoyed from his corner office every day. I'd memorized every detail of that office during my late-night cleaning sessions. The vintage sailing photos on the walls, the collection of rare books he never read, and most importantly, the papers he carelessly left on his desk. "Evening, Beth," called out Jerry, the night security guard, barely looking up from his crossword puzzle. "Quiet night ahead." I smiled and nodded, the same routine we'd followed for 3 years. Jerry had no idea that under my cleaner's uniform, I wore a wireless earpiece connected to my phone. In my pocket, a tiny camera was ready to document anything interesting I might find on Alexander Harrison's desk tonight. Starting with the break room tonight, I said that I knew exactly where I'd be heading first. Harrison Technologies was about to announce a major acquisition, and I needed to know the details before making my next move. As I pushed my cart down the hall, I thought about how it all began. My mother, Sarah Williams, had been a junior accountant at Harrison Technologies 29 years ago. She'd fallen in love with a young, ambitious Alexander Harrison, who was already making a name for himself in the tech industry. Their relationship had been brief but intense until she told him she was pregnant. His response had been swift and cruel. A severance package, a non-disclosure agreement, and a clear message to disappear. My mother, young and scared, had taken the money and moved across the country. She'd raised me alone, never hiding the truth about my father but never letting it define me either. "Get an education," she'd always said. "That's something no one can take from you." I did more than that. I earned my MBA, specialized in corporate finance, and spent 5 years at one of the top investment firms in New York, all while keeping tabs on Harrison Technologies and the father who'd never wanted me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could have walked into Harrison Technologies through the front door, resume in hand, and probably landed a decent position. But that wasn't my plan. I needed to understand the company from the ground up, to see its true inner workings, not just what was presented in board meetings and quarterly reports. I approached Alexander Harrison's office, my heart rate picking up slightly as I inserted my cleaning key into the lock. The familiar click felt different tonight, more significant, maybe because this was the first time I was entering as a shareholder, even if a minor one. The office was exactly as he'd left it, papers scattered across the desk, his laptop closed but not locked away, a security oversight I'd noted months ago, and a half-empty coffee cup perched precariously near the edge of his desk. I started my usual cleaning routine, but my attention was focused on the documents partially hidden under a folder marked confidential. As I dusted his desk, I carefully shifted the papers so my hidden camera could capture the contents. Acquisition details, just as I'd suspected, but something else caught my eye. A personal letter, handwritten on expensive stationery. My hands trembled slightly as I read the first lines. "Dear Alexander, as my health continues to decline, we need to discuss the future of Harrison Technologies." It was from Thomas Harrison, my grandfather, the founder of Harrison Technologies. I'd never met him, but I'd studied everything about him while planning my strategy. He built this company from nothing, turning a small software development firm into a tech giant. Now, at 82, he was apparently facing his mortality and questioning his son's leadership. I photographed the letter quickly, my mind already racing with the implications. If Thomas Harrison was worried about the company's future under Alexander's leadership, It could explain the rumors I'd been hearing about potential board restructuring. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made me freeze. Not Jerry's shuffling walk. These were purposeful steps, accompanied by voices. I quickly returned everything to its original position and grabbed my cleaning supplies, making sure to look busy as the office door opened. Need to handle this carefully, a male voice was saying. The old man can't just. Alexander Harrison stopped short when he saw me, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance. What are you doing here? I kept my eyes down, playing the part of the apologetic cleaner. Sorry, sir. Just finishing up. I'll come back later. No need, he said dismissively. We'll be working late. Skip this office tonight. I nodded and hurried out, pushing my cart past him and the man I recognized as James Porter, the company's CFO. As I closed the door behind me, I caught a glimpse of my father's face. The face I'd studied in magazines and company photos for years. He looked tired, worried even. The letter from my grandfather must have hit harder than I'd thought. Back in the hallway, I let out a slow breath. Close calls were part of the job, but this one felt different. Maybe because I'd seen something in my father's eyes I hadn't expected. Fear. Alexander Harrison, the man who'd built his reputation on being untouchable, was afraid of losing control. I continued my rounds, but my mind was working overtime. The pieces were falling into place faster than I'd anticipated. Thomas Harrison's letter, the acquisition plans, the board restructuring rumors, it all pointed to a company in transition, and transition meant opportunity. 3 years ago, when I first took this job, my plan had been simple: gather information, build evidence of my father's questionable business practices, and use it to force him to acknowledge me. But somewhere along the way, it had evolved into something bigger. I didn't just want acknowledgement anymore. I wanted what should have been mine all along: a place at Harrison Technologies. Not as a cleaner, not even as Alexander Harrison's daughter, but as someone who could lead this company better than he ever had. The 2% ownership I'd acquired was just the beginning. With the right moves and the information I gathered, I could position myself to take control when the inevitable power struggle began. As I finished my shift and packed up my cleaning cart, I thought about my mother. She'd passed away 2 years ago, never knowing I'd taken this job, never knowing I found a way to infiltrate the company that had once cast her out. Part of me wished she could see me now, but another part was glad she couldn't. She'd always warned me about the price of revenge, about how it could consume you if you weren't careful. This isn't about revenge, I whispered to myself as I walked to my car. This is about justice. But as I drove home to my modest apartment, I couldn't help wondering if there was really a difference. The stock certificate in my pocket felt heavier than ever, a tangible reminder of the line I'd crossed. There would be no going back now. I parked in my usual spot and took the stairs to my third-floor apartment, my mind already working on the next phase of my plan. The letter from Thomas Harrison had changed the timeline. I needed to move faster, be bolder. If my grandfather was indeed dying, the power structure at Harrison Technologies would soon be up for grabs. Inside my apartment, I went straight to my home office, a small room that looked nothing like the modest dwelling of a cleaning woman. 3 monitors displayed stock charts, company news, and surveillance feeds. A wall of notes and photographs tracked the key players at Harrison Technologies. And in the center of my desk sat a photo I'd stolen from my father's office during my first week on the job. A picture of him and my grandfather at the company's IPO celebration. I pulled out my phone and downloaded the photos I'd taken that night. The acquisition documents would need careful analysis, but it was the letter from Thomas Harrison that held my attention. I read it again, slower this time, taking in every word. Dear Alexander, as my health continues to decline, we need to discuss the future of Harrison Technologies. Your recent decisions have given me cause for concern. The board shares my worries about the direction you're taking the company. I built this company on innovation and integrity, not just profit margins. Your focus on short-term gains over sustainable growth goes against everything I've tried to teach you. Perhaps my biggest failure was not seeing this sooner. We need to meet. There are things you don't know, decisions I've made that will impact the future of Harrison Technologies. Don't make me formalize this through the board. Your father, Thomas. I sat back in my chair, a smile playing at my lips. Thomas Harrison wasn't just worried about the company, he was preparing to take action. The question was, how could I use this to my advantage? I pulled up the company's shareholder registry on my computer. My 2% ownership was hidden behind a series of shell companies untraceable to me. But I wasn't the only one quietly buying shares. Several investment firms had been accumulating small positions over the past few months. Were they anticipating the same power struggle I was? A notification popped up on my screen, an email from my contact at the SEC. Another piece of the puzzle was falling into place. Tomorrow, I would take the biggest risk yet in my carefully orchestrated plan. Tomorrow, I would start the process of becoming Harrison Technologies' largest independent shareholder. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. For a moment, I saw my mother's face again. The same determination, the same hint of sadness around the eyes. "I'm doing this for both of us, Mom," I whispered. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I wondered if that was really true. Was I doing this for my mother's memory, for my own sense of justice, or for something else entirely? The answer, I suspected, would become clear soon enough. The next few weeks would test everything I worked for. My father thought he was untouchable, thought he could dismiss people from his life without consequences. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I closed my eyes, already planning my next move. Tomorrow would be another night of cleaning offices, gathering information, and quietly building my case. But soon, very soon, Beth the cleaner would disappear, and Elizabeth Harrison would finally take her place at the company that should have been her birthright. The game was changing, and I was the only player who knew all the rules. The morning headlines hit like a bombshell. Harrison Technologies faces hostile takeover attempt. I smiled as I read the article on my tablet, knowing I had orchestrated every word. The 15% ownership stake I quietly accumulated through various shell companies had finally been revealed, sending shockwaves through the corporate world. My father's reaction was exactly what I'd expected. Within hours, Harrison Technologies issued a statement denouncing the opportunistic attempt to destabilize a great American company. Alexander Harrison, ever the showman, scheduled a press conference for that afternoon. I watched it from my apartment, still in my cleaner's uniform after finishing my morning shift. "This company was built by my father," he declared, his voice carrying that familiar authoritative tone. "And I will not let unnamed investors tear apart his legacy." If only he knew that legacy was exactly what I was fighting for. The past 3 weeks since discovering my grandfather's letter had been a whirlwind of calculated moves. I'd liquidated every asset I owned, called in every favor, and leveraged contacts from my investment banking days to amass the capital needed for this play. The 2% stake I'd started with had been just the beginning. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus, my old colleague from Goldman Sachs, who'd helped arrange the share purchases. "Board's calling an emergency meeting tomorrow. Your timing is perfect." Perfect timing wasn't luck. It was the result of 3 years of meticulous planning. I'd watched Alexander Harrison run this company like his personal kingdom, making decisions that benefited him while ignoring long-term consequences. The acquisition he'd been planning would have gutted the company's R&D department, sacrificing innovation for quick profits. Just like my grandfather's letter had suggested, Alexander cared more about short-term gains than sustainable growth. I changed out of my cleaner's uniform and into a carefully chosen outfit, a charcoal gray suit that cost more than Beth the cleaner made in 3 months. Tonight would be my last shift at Harrison Technologies, though no one knew that yet. I had one final task to complete before revealing myself. The night shift started as usual. Jerry barely looked up from his newspaper as I wheeled my cleaning cart toward the elevator. But tonight, instead of heading straight to the executive floor, I made my way to the IT department on the 3rd floor. "Evening, Beth," called out Mike, the night shift IT tech. Like Jerry, he'd grown used to my presence over the years. Unlike Jerry, he'd actually been helpful, unknowingly providing valuable information about the company's network security. "Hi, Mike," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Server room needs cleaning tonight. Mr. Harrison's orders." Mike frowned. "Really? Nobody told me about that." I shrugged, pulling out a work order I forged. "Just following the schedule." He glanced at the paper and nodded. "All right, but be careful in there. Don't touch anything that looks important." If only he knew what I was really after. Inside the server room, I quickly located what I needed: the backup drives containing board meeting recordings from the past 5 years. My father, ever paranoid about leaks, insisted on recording every meeting. Those recordings had captured countless instances of his questionable decision-making, including discussions about burying negative product reviews and sidestepping regulatory requirements. I slipped the drives into a hidden compartment in my cleaning cart, replacing them with identical ones that contained nothing but static. By the time anyone discovered the switch, it would be too late. As I finished my rounds, I took one last look at my father's office. The space that had once intimidated me now seemed smaller, less impressive. The vintage sailing photos, the rare books, the elaborate desk, all of it spoke to a man more concerned with appearances than substance. "Goodbye, Beth," Jerry called out as I left for the last time. "See you tomorrow." "Goodbye, Jerry," I replied softly, knowing I'd never see him again. Back home, I carefully added the stolen drives to my evidence wall. Tomorrow, everything would change. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m., and I had no intention of missing it. I spent the night reviewing my presentation, making sure every detail was perfect. The hostile takeover attempt was just the opening move. Once the board saw the evidence I gathered, the financial mismanagement, the ethical breaches, the pattern of decisions that put personal profit above company interests, they would understand why Alexander Harrison needed to be removed. Morning came too quickly and not quickly enough. I dressed carefully in a tailored black suit, my mother's sapphire pendant around my neck. The pendant was the only piece of jewelry she kept from her time with Alexander, a gift from him during their brief relationship. She'd given it to me on my 21st birthday, saying, "Remember who you are, not just whose you are." The Harrison Technologies lobby felt different as I walked through the main entrance instead of the service entrance. A security guard at the desk didn't recognize me without my cleaner's uniform. "May I help you?" I handed him my ID, my real ID. Elizabeth Harrison for the board meeting. His eyes widened slightly at the name, but he quickly composed himself and made a call. Within minutes, I was being escorted to the boardroom on the top floor. The room fell silent as I entered. 12 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me, but I only cared about 2. My father, standing at the head of the table, looked confused and irritated by the interruption. And my grandfather, Thomas Harrison, sitting in his wheelchair by the window, studied me with an intensity that suggested he already knew who I was. "Who are you?" Alexander demanded. "This is a private meeting." I smiled, feeling oddly calm. "My name is Elizabeth Harrison. I represent the investment group that now owns 15% of this company." I paused, letting that sink in before adding, "I'm also your daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander's face went pale, then red. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "Security." "I wouldn't do that," I said, pulling out a USB drive. "Not before the board sees what's on here." Thomas Harrison held up a hand, stopping the security guard who had started toward me. "Let her speak." For the next hour, I laid out my case. The financial records showing Alexander's mismanagement, the evidence of ethical breaches, the pattern of decisions that had weakened the company's competitive position. With each revelation, I could see the board members' expressions shifting from skepticism to concern to outrage. "This is a fabrication," Alexander interrupted, his voice shaking. "She's trying to destroy everything we've built." "No," I said firmly. "I'm trying to save it. I've spent the last 3 years learning this company from the ground up, watching you run it into the ground. I worked as a cleaner, coming in every night, seeing how things really operated when you thought no one was watching." Thomas Harrison wheeled himself forward, his eyes never leaving my face. "Sarah's daughter," he said quietly. "I wondered if you'd ever find your way here." Alexander's head snapped toward his father. "You knew?" "I knew about Sarah's pregnancy," Thomas replied. "I tried to convince you to do the right thing back then. You refused." He turned back to me. "Continue, please." I outlined my plan for the company, returning to the principles of innovation and integrity that Thomas had built it on, investing in R&D, and developing sustainable growth strategies. As I spoke, I could see the board members nodding, some taking notes, others whispering among themselves. "This is absurd," Alexander cut in again. "You can't seriously be considering." "We're not just considering it," Thomas interrupted. "We're voting on it." Now, what followed was the longest 30 minutes of my life. The board voted to suspend Alexander pending a full investigation of my allegations. Thomas Harrison was reinstated as interim CEO, with me appointed as Chief Strategy Officer. As the board members filed out, Alexander remained frozen in his chair, staring at me with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why come back after all these years?" I met his gaze steadily. "Because this company deserves better than what you've given it. Because the daughter you dismissed might be the only one who can save your father's legacy. I built this company into what it is today," he protested. "No," Thomas said firmly. "You inherited a great company and nearly drove it into the ground. Elizabeth has shown more understanding of what Harrison Technology should be than you ever did." As I turned to leave, Alexander called out, "You think this makes us family? You think this changes anything?" I paused at the door. "No, it doesn't make us family, but it does make me your boss." The look on his face as I walked out was something I'd remember for a long time. In the hallway, Thomas gestured for me to follow him to his private office. Once inside, he pulled out an old photograph from his desk drawer, a picture of my mother holding me as a baby. "I kept track of you over the years," he said softly. "Your achievements, your education. I should have done more." "Why didn't you?" I asked, the question I'd wondered about for years finally coming out. He sighed heavily. "Pride, perhaps, or cowardice. I let Alexander's mistakes become my own." He looked up at me, his eyes clear and determined. "But we can fix that now, if you're willing." I studied the man who was both stranger and family. "I didn't come here looking for a grandfather," I said carefully. "No," he smiled. "You came here to take control of a billion-dollar company, and you did it brilliantly." He wheeled himself to the window, looking out over the city. "But maybe, while we're rebuilding this company, we can rebuild something else too." I joined him at the window, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The little girl who grew up without a father. The young woman who turned rejection into determination. The cleaner who became the boss. "Maybe we can," I said softly. The sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across the office. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, restructuring the company, implementing my plans, dealing with the fallout from Alexander's suspension. But for now, standing next to my grandfather, watching the day end from an office I'd once cleaned, I felt a sense of peace. The game wasn't over, but the rules had changed, and this time, I wasn't playing from the shadows. 1 month after taking control of Harrison Technologies, I sat in what had once been Alexander's office, reviewing the latest financial reports. The vintage sailing photos were gone, replaced by charts tracking our new R&D initiatives. The pretentious rare books had given way to actual technical manuals and industry analyses. This wasn't just an office anymore. It was a command center for rebuilding the company. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Board meeting in 20 minutes. Alexander's appealing his suspension." I wasn't surprised. My father had spent the past month building his case, claiming I had obtained information illegally during my time as a cleaner. He'd hired the best lawyers money could buy. Though that money was quickly running out, the board had frozen most of his assets pending the investigation. "Ready?" Thomas asked, wheeling himself into my office. Despite his declining health, he'd been an invaluable ally during the transition, helping me navigate the complex relationships within the company. "Always," I replied, gathering my files. "How many board members is he trying to sway?" 3, Thomas said grimly. "Morton, Chen, and Davis. They're old friends of his, worried about their own positions if all his decisions come under scrutiny." I nodded, having expected this. "Then it's time to show them what I found in the server room backups." The boardroom looked exactly as it had a month ago when I'd revealed my identity, but the dynamics had shifted dramatically. Where once I'd been the outsider forcing my way in, now I sat at the head of the table, Thomas at my right hand. Alexander and his lawyers sat at the far end, like supplicants before a court. "Mr. Harrison has prepared a statement," his lawyer began, but I held up my hand. "Before we hear any statements," I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd learned from years of watching my father, "I'd like to share some new information with the board." I nodded to my assistant, who distributed folders to each board member. "These transcripts come from board meeting recordings dating back 5 years. Pay particular attention to the highlighted sections." The room fell silent as they read. I watched their faces change as they discovered the extent of Alexander's manipulation. The backdated contracts, the buried safety reports, the systematic dismantling of the quality control processes my grandfather had put in place. "This is illegal surveillance," Alexander's lawyer protested. "These recordings were made on your client's own orders," I interrupted. "Every board meeting for the past 5 years, recorded and archived. Company policy, isn't that right, Dad?" Alexander's face had gone pale. He knew what those recordings contained. Every unethical decision, every manipulation, every time he put his own interests above the company's. "Morton," I said, addressing one of his allies directly, "pay special attention to the discussion about the pension fund investments. Notice how your name comes up." Morton's hands trembled as he read the relevant section. The other board members leaned over to look, and I could see the moment they understood. Alexander hadn't just betrayed the company. He implicated many of them in his schemes. "This is a witch hunt," Alexander said, standing up. "You're trying to destroy everything I built." "You built?" Thomas's voice cut through the room like steel. "You inherited this company when it was at its peak. You inherited a legacy of innovation, of integrity. And what did you do with it?" "I made us profitable," Alexander shot back. "I kept us competitive." "You made yourself profitable," I corrected, pulling out another document. "This analysis shows the correlation between company decisions and your personal stock trades. Notice how you always seem to sell before bad news went public, or buy before positive announcements." The lawyer whispered something urgently in Alexander's ear, but he brushed him off. "You're just like your mother," he spat. "She tried to trap me too, showing up with her pregnancy test and her dreams of playing happy family." The room fell silent. I stood slowly, letting his words hang in the air. "My mother never tracked you. She loved you, believed in you. Her mistake was thinking you were capable of loving anything other than power and money." "And what do you love?" he demanded. "You infiltrated this company, spied on us, manipulated your way into control." "I love what this company could be," I said firmly. "What it was meant to be. I spent 3 years cleaning these offices, watching talented people being held back by your ego. I saw innovations buried because they didn't fit your short-term profit goals. I watched you slowly kill everything my grandfather built." "Our grandfather," he corrected bitterly. "No," Thomas said quietly. "She earned the right to call me that. You lost it." The board voted unanimously to make Alexander's suspension permanent. His allies, seeing the evidence of his manipulation, turned on him to save themselves. As security escorted him out, he turned to me one last time. "You think you've won?" he asked, his voice breaking. "You think you can run this company better than I did?" I met his gaze steadily. "I already am." The next few hours were a blur of paperwork and preparations. The press would need to be notified, statements prepared, markets managed. But before all that, I had one more task to complete. I went down to the lobby where Jerry was just starting his night shift. He looked up in surprise as I approached his desk. "Ms. Harrison," he said uncertainly. "I mean, I guess you were Beth." "I don't." I smiled, holding out an envelope. "Thank you, Jerry, for being kind to the cleaning woman who never existed." Inside the envelope was a promotion letter. Head of Building Security, reporting directly to me. His eyes widened as he read it. "I don't understand," he said. "Why?" "Because you treated everyone with respect, regardless of their position. That's the kind of person we need here." Next, I visited Mike and it. He got a promotion too, along with funding for the security upgrades he'd been requesting for years. One by one, I saw out the people who'd shown kindness to Beth the cleaner, who'd done their jobs with integrity even when management didn't care. That evening, as the sun set over the city, I found myself back in my old cleaning closet. My cart was still there, though someone else would be using it now. I ran my hand along the handle, remembering all the nights I pushed it through these halls, gathering information, building my case, preparing for this moment. "Having second thoughts?" Thomas asked from the doorway. I turned to face him, smiling. "No, just remembering where I started." He wheeled himself closer, looking thoughtfully at the cleaning supplies. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said in the board meeting, about what this company could be. And I think you're already making it happen." He pulled out an old photograph. Not the one of my mother this time, but one I'd never seen before. It showed him as a young man, standing in front of a tiny storefront with a hand-painted sign, Harrison Electronics. "I started with nothing," he said softly, "built it all from scratch. Your father never understood that part. He was born into success, never had to fight for it." "Like me," I pointed out. He shook his head. No, you fought harder than anyone. You could have come in with lawyers and demands, tried to claim your birthright through the courts. Instead, you learned this company from the ground up. You earned every bit of it. I felt tears threatening but held them back. I'm not finished earning it. No, he agreed. But you've made one hell of a start. The next morning, I arrived early to find a line of reporters outside the building. News of Alexander's permanent removal had leaked, and everyone wanted the story. I straightened my jacket, touched my mother's pendant for luck, and stepped out of my car. Ms. Harrison, they called out, is it true you worked as a cleaner here? Did you really spy on your own father? What are your plans for the company? I paused at the top of the steps, thinking about everything that had brought me to this moment. The little girl who grew up without a father. The woman who spent years planning her revenge. The cleaner who became CEO. Harrison Technologies is entering a new era, I said clearly. We're returning to our roots of innovation and integrity, while moving forward into the future. As for working as a cleaner, yes, I did. Because sometimes the only way to really understand a company is to see it from the ground up. Later that day, I received a package. Inside was a frame containing my old cleaning uniform, with a note from Thomas. Never forget where you started. It's what makes you different from him. I hung it on my office wall, right where Alexander's sailing photos used to be. A reminder that success isn't about what you're given, but what you're willing to work for. That evening, as I worked late in my office, I caught a glimpse of the night cleaning crew starting their rounds. They moved differently now, heads held higher, more confident. Word had spread about my story, and suddenly the invisible workers weren't so invisible anymore. I touched my mother's pendant, wishing she could see what I'd accomplished. She'd always told me that revenge wasn't the answer, that it would consume me if I let it. But this didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like justice, like restoration. My phone buzzed. A message from Alexander's lawyer. He wanted to meet, to discuss terms. I deleted it without responding. There was nothing left to discuss. The past was the past, and I had a company to run. As night fell over the city, I stood at my office window, looking out at the lights below. Somewhere out there, my father was probably plotting his next move, trying to figure out how to regain what he'd lost. But he'd never understand what he'd really lost. Not the company, not the power, but the chance to know his daughter. His loss, I decided. I had work to do. The cleaning cart still sat in my old closet, a reminder of where this all began, but now it was just that, a reminder. The game was over, and I had won, not just for myself, but for my mother, for my grandfather, and for every person who'd ever been underestimated or overlooked. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply becoming everything they said you couldn't be. I am Elizabeth Harrison, daughter of Alexander Harrison, granddaughter of Thomas Harrison. But more importantly, I am the woman who cleaned offices at night and became CEO by day. I am the proof that where you start doesn't determine where you finish, and I'm just getting started.